Welcome to Lendlease's head office here in Queensland, and thank you for coming tonight. I might do a few things first. Firstly, acknowledgement to country, so I'd like to pay our respects for the elders, past, present and emerging, and just be careful down those stairs, yep, no worries. Just in terms of housekeeping, there is a toilet here behind us at the entrance of the glass doors. There's a security pass there to enable you to get in to use the toilets over there, so you can do that. Obviously, if you hear the emergency signs, just follow directions, and also the emergency lights that we have installed, so nothing new about those kinds of things. And yes, just be careful up and down the steep stairs, especially when carrying things that are open glasses. Firstly, my name is Jeremy Mansfield. I'm the National Sustainability Operations Manager for Building and also Regional Sustainability Manager for Queensland Northern Territory for our Lendlease building business, and operate out of here. I think I've said all the other welcome acknowledgements I need to do. And it's my job really to introduce Hayley Jarrett, the CEO for Supply Chain Sustainability School, and she's going to kick off and kind of lead activities, and I'll probably just pop in and ask questions as we go along. So, and this is an interactive forum, so please make sure that you get the most out of tonight by asking as many questions as you can. So Hayley, over to you.
Welcome everybody. Thanks for popping along this afternoon. We've got a good lineup to be able to talk about something that I think is really topical. So we've got a few speakers to start the conversation. So I'll be kicking off with why is recycling in the spotlight at the moment, and what's the industry's capability to respond, and then we'll hear from Robert with the Yarrabilba Cape, talking about Yarrabilba and all the wonderful stuff that's happening over there, down there, up there, down there. And then we're going to switch over to Nana Borsey from Global Green Tag, who's going to run us through some of the some materials that are out there and some opportunities to actually work with recycled content materials in the industry. And then once we've done some 3 short presentations, we're going to open up to Q&A. So think of all of your questions that you desperately need answers to, and we can touch base and answer them all for you at the end of the evening. If at any point you need to stop and get clarity or you can't hear or anything else, just sing out the quickly so that you can get cracking on that. So I suppose first up is me sort of explaining the issue. So I suppose when I started penning this together and thinking about some of the common stuff that I've been speaking about over the past few weeks, it's, is this a crisis or is this an opportunity? And there's 2 very different school camps in this space over whether it's a crisis or whether it's an opportunity, and how you're poised to be able to respond to that. Because there's certainly some evidence on both sides to sort of provide evidence to both of those arguments, if you like, to be able to spit that through. So I suppose thinking about what started all of this and what started the recycling question and where everyone thinks sort of the current conversation around recycling and recycled content is sort of kicking off from, is the decision by China at the start of 2018 to enforce or the National Sword Policy, which is now called Blue Sky Policy. And essentially what that policy is, it's been reframed in a few different ways, but what they did was take all of the imports of all the commodities of traded recyclable goods and lower the contamination rates on those thresholds to be able to come into the country. So if you look at something like plastic, it had sort of like a 2% contamination rate, or fibres had 5%. All of those rates are now dropped down to 0.5%. So to give you some context over whether that's okay, it's not a ban. You know, if you can get your contamination rates down that low, you can import, that's fine. The average curbside recycling contamination rate is about 6 to 10%. I'm sure there's a few people in the room that can sort of throw out the construction contamination waste rates as well. So getting from 6 to 10% down to 0.5% is massive, and it effectively banned imports of recycled content into their industries from most of sort of Australia and America were big hitters in that space. And so to give you a bit of an indication of what that actually did, so you'll see there as you go from 2016-17 to 2017-18, the massive decline in exports of waste to China, purely based on that policy being implemented. And then you sort of think, well, where else would it go? But don't worry, we'll just export it to other countries. And, you know, this is a commodity, it's a globally traded thing, someone has to buy it. Until other Southeast Asian countries also started to reject shipments from high contamination. And so if we're looking, through Indonesia and Malaysia, there's a massive issue there. So if Malaysia, Vietnam and Thailand enacted the same sort of waste import ban similar to that of China, we would need to find substitute domestic or export markets for about 1.3 million tonnes, which is the equivalent of about $530 million worth of waste. And yet, even with all of that coming into play, if you remember the previous graph where we saw the exports to China dropping off, what actually happened was we exported more of our waste during that period, but just to other countries. So instead of China says we can't import anymore, and we went, oh golly, maybe we should try and do something with Australia. No, they just went, let's just try and export it somewhere else. And so that being the current solution to that problem, obviously if those countries then turn around and say, nope, we're not taking it either, then that then pushes the problem back into Australia's shores, which means we need to try and do something about it. And the response to that of COAG was pretty clear in August, where they announced that they had agreed that Australia should establish a timeline to ban the exports of plastic, paper, glass and tyres. And I suppose to do that, we need to be able to build the capacity within the Australian context to generate high value recycled commodities and build that associated demand. And then sort of next steps to that, this should be a familiar face around these parts. A member for Brisbane and the Assistant Minister for Waste Reduction and Environmental Management, I thought my title was long, Trevor Evans, is also seeking agreement from states and territory ministers in the COAG meeting this week to spend a portion of their procurement budgets on recycled materials for public procurement, which is the first step to, okay, let's ban the exports, but we still need to try and find a solution within Australia to that problem. Great, let's use government money. And how about every time we spend money, we just allocate a percentage of that where we have to buy content with high recycled content in that. Trevor did send his apologies for this evening. He really did want to be here. Imagine in his hometown talking about recycling and he was devastated he couldn't come. So apologies, passport can go. And so then to try and put this in the context of, okay, so we've got this problem, but what's the size of the problem that we're really talking about here? So we go back and have a look at the National Waste Policy. So there's a couple of versions of this. The latest one's in 2018. The first one was produced in 2009. It's got a couple of cool stats in there that we can talk through, but essentially it's a framework for waste and resource recovery within Australia. And some of the big stats that pop out the back of that are, let's talk about how much waste we actually produce in Australia. So annualised, Australians produce about 6.7 million tonnes of waste. So given that we've got about 25 million people, it's just over 2.1, 2.2 tonnes per person per annum, which is a lot as a per person rate goes. But one thing that we have done well in that space is we've actually recycled 37 million tonnes of it, or so it's been separated for recycling. An additional 3% of that is also separated out into to recover for energy production. So if you look at that recovery rate, it's 58% is being recovered in that 2016-17 period, which, it's not 90s, but to put it in perspective, back in 1996, that rate was 7%. So there's been a massive improvement in Australia in the recovery of waste before it goes to landfill. What's also happened over that time is a massive increase in the amount of waste. So even through that, even though we're recovering a high percentage of that, the green bar, I suppose, of all the residual waste that's going to landfill has actually increased over that time and not decreased, even though we've had that dramatic percentage increase. And so, well, where is all of this recycling going? So here's a bit of a breakdown of where that all goes. So in terms of the quantity recycled, as you can see, most of it's in metals, paper and cardboard. And then 49% of metals are exported, 39% of paper and cardboard, 72% of all plastics that are recycled are exported. And then obviously others. So the average of all waste is about 12% of all of that recovered 37 million tonnes is exported. And if you're looking at the quantity that's then exported to China specifically within that, you'll see that there's a large proportion of that paper and cardboard that's obviously going to China, and a reasonable proportion of those plastics are going to China in there as well. Now, I love a good stat and a good infographic. So here's a couple from the National Waste Policy, if you haven't already read through them, and puts that waste and recycling industry within Australia into context of how we're going to get through and do that. And I know a few people are taking photos, I'll get all the slides and we're recording them to get them all out, so don't freak out if you miss a slide, don't go too fast. So let's look at this. Waste management services are valued at $12.6 billion per annum Australian industry. That is a massive industry that we currently have established that can help tackle this problem. We are not starting from scratch in this space. There's $2.9 billion per annum through sales of recovered materials. So that's revenue generated. You know, this is money coming into the industry. Waste-related activities add a total value of $6.9 billion to the economy. This is an industry that is valuable to Australia. And for every 10,000 tonnes of waste recycled is 9.2 jobs are created. So in terms of if you're thinking, you know, I always think in terms of triple bottom line sustainability, there are environmental benefits to this, there are economic benefits to this, there are people benefits to this. Society is benefiting from the recycling industry within Australia right now without changing anything. There are some bad news there. There's obviously plastics in the marine life, we don't want that. And then there's obviously the associated greenhouse gas emissions as we get there as well. We also spend a lot of money buying food that we waste with that, which is a massive problem. And the diagram on the right, I'll send through a link to get a more detailed version of it, but that's sort of a bit of a waste flow stream of exactly what happens within Australia. And it sort of points out there that there's this municipal solid waste, there's commercial and industrial waste, and there's construction demolition waste that all feed into this waste infrastructure network, of which recycling is a major portion of that, and there are landfills obviously as well down the bottom where some of this product ends up. But there's also recycled products that come out the back of that. So this is actual goods and materials that are being constructed with recycled content, and that is where another social about later on. And so why is all of this important? I suppose let's step out and stretch back globally as well. And for those of you that follow the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and what they're all about, and pop into number 12, so responsible consumption and production. If we want to actually achieve that, we all have to work together. And so this means, you know, a lot of people are talking about this, about the circular economy, about actually being conscious of things as it goes through the entire waste stream, either that's from general consumption from people in their households or construction waste in industry. Because when you're buying something, be conscious of where it comes from. Do you really need to buy that? And then when you dispose of it, is it recyclable? Thinking about things in terms of that whole circular economy. And I'm sure that there's a few great examples that come up in this presentation as well about sort of being conscious when you buy things about what's going to happen with what you've just bought and where that's going to end up. It's also really timely that there's a lot of not-for-profits and NGOs working in this space, and so it'd be remiss of me not to point out that National Recycling Week is coming up, that Planet Arc sort of promote, so everyone should be talking about recycling and talking about how we can all purchase recycled content. And also make sure that our recovery rates on site in our office and our home are also increasing and being able to put in there. And so one of the major issues with sort of domestic recycling is that 94% of Australians make at least one recycling mistake. And so Planet Arc do have a really good online survey where you can go online and they'll text you. So can you recycle this? Can you put this in this bin? And which one of these can you or can't you do? And it's just a really quick questionnaire, but if it educates you, it's a fun game to be able to get through. I encourage everybody to go through and be able to see how accurate or how they think they might, what they think they might know, whether that's correct. And one of the biggest problems in that recovery rate from curbside recycling is people putting their recyclables inside a plastic bag inside their recycling bin. And I think what isn't as well known through the industry is that anything that is inside a plastic bag inside your recycling bin goes straight to landfill. They don't open them up and sort them. They just go straight to landfill. So if you spot friends and relatives and loved ones doing it, you pretty much tell them what they're doing. So I don't think that's really what's really out there, and one of the biggest cause of that recovery rate with curbside recycling. But thinking back and thinking about that whole industry that's set up, well, how are they tackled? How are they placed to be able to use all of these wonderful new resources that are going to be at their disposal to be able to produce commodities into the Australian market? And I suppose a good place to go is the Australian Council of Recycling, where they sort of pointed out that, you can see a lot of populist journalism and the crisis yielders are saying there's these massive factories and massive stores of all of this recycled product that's just sitting and being stockpiled, and we've got no use for it, and it's going to have to be burned or sent to landfill. And yet, the Australian Council of Recycling sort of pointed out a really quick one that said, oh, well, actually, all of the stockpiles are plastic if you put that into the roads of just one project. So just the Snowy Hydro Skiing project that has about 27 k's of road in it, you'd use up that whole stockpile just on that one project. So it actually doesn't take a lot to be able to transform the industry and get rid of some of those stockpiles that we currently have. And they did a bit of analysis and came back with saying, how could we de-risk the Australian recycling industry? And they really followed. It'll take 150 mil, and you can do three things: spend about 90 mil of that on building infrastructure, including local plastics, glass and fibre processing, and upgrading a few facilities. 30 million on positive procurement programs to build markets, so that people know how to purchase recycled content in a lot of their products. And, you know, drop another lazy 30 mil on waste education to reduce gross contamination of those rates. To be able to get in there. And in terms of that positive procurement and education program, last week at the Australian Waste and Recycling Expo, there was some of the key points that people put out there was that, you know, some people are always quick to blame the standards haven't caught up, we can't specify this product, the standards aren't in there. A lot of the time the standards are in there. There's a big barrier with engineers willing to sign off on using a new product, whether that has recycled content or not, for the first time in a job. And I think that there's that fear of change, or that acknowledgement of when you're changing something that's tried and tested on a project, to switching to something different, that it creates a whole lot of risk. And then what is the willingness to be able to switch over to that? And the industry is seeing a lot of that as the major pushback for actually increasing demand for recycled content products within the industry sectors. So here's a couple which are hopefully very familiar sort of frameworks. So waste hierarchy. So obviously we're talking about recycling here, which is halfway down that mix. So obviously avoiding that waste should be our top priority, and Australians are on their track to actually decreasing their per capita usage of waste, but as our population grows, that's obviously going to increase the amount of waste that we generate. But step one is we should be able to avoid waste entirely. And then obviously we want to be able to reduce the amount of waste that comes in, and we want to be able to reuse what we can before we then go to recycling it. Then if we talk about our stockpile situation, we go, okay, we can't recycle it, can we burn up any of the energy and put it in there? One stat that I heard last week was if we burnt all of our stockpiles of recycling, it would produce less than 1% of Australia's energy requirements. So this isn't going to be, this isn't something that is going to produce a massive energy winner in the Australian market. And then of course, if you can't get energy from it, then treating and disposing of it should be the very last option within there. And then touching base on the circular economy. So there's a number of different diagrams out there to explain what the circular economy is and how it all works. But I think that we'll do a bit of a show of hands. How many people in this room have heard of the circular economy? Brilliant. About 6 months ago, it was about half the amount of people. So I think that talking about this issue and getting it out there, that concept of what is a circular economy and how can we reuse that, is definitely increasing. And then people are now starting to look for all those opportunities to fix into that space. I suppose one thing that we also have to talk about in here, and that avoiding recovery cycle, is that we have stockpiles of goods because at the moment we don't have an industry using that resource in an effective and cost-effective way. And yet there are some materials, if we go back to one of the biggest exports and one of the biggest content areas, is to talk about metals. So recycling metals is a massive commodity and gets sold overseas, and people who work in the metal industries know that recovering that, there is a cost-effective solution to be able to recover that and reuse it. And so they have an effective system set up. So you don't see very much metal, like scrap metals being left in landfills, because you're getting a good rate on being able to pull them out and get some money back and getting recovered beforehand. So you probably start to see some of them usually when they're being used in a way that mixes with other materials that you can't separate them out, so it's a contamination issue, or there's a remote location issue with being able to recover some of those for different projects as well. And yet they're not included in the the export ban in this for a reason, because there's already systems set up. One of the biggest problems with plastics is that at the moment it's still far cheaper to extract raw materials and generate new plastic than what it is to try and use recovered plastics in the industry. And we don't have a value on what that means as we go and buy new plastics all the time. And so because of that, that link is disconnected within the plastic cycle that seems to be connected with metals. So we have to try and fix those problems. But I suppose then, as all ecologists will tell you, if you artificially interfere with one system, you'll be able to interrupt others. So one of the key warnings is around every time we go and play with this economy is to make sure that we're not actually destroying something else that's working functionally at the moment as we go through and do that. So we'd hate to shut down the entire industry of one product because we're using a stockpile for one thing, and then that stockpile disappears and we can't go back to any other continuity of supply for a certain product or a certain type of solution that's currently being implemented on that scale. But there are some really good things happening around the place. So we'll talk to just a couple of them. So obviously in New South Wales they have a circular economy policy that was released at the end of last year. And in March this year they've pledged to have $47 million to support recycling in New South Wales, and they've got an intergovernmental task force, and there's a whole plethora of other initiatives that they've put in place to try and address this issue directly. And a couple of weeks ago, Sustainability Victoria are doing a lot of work in this space, and they kicked off their inaugural Buy Recycle Conference and Expo, where they showcased a lot of suppliers and materials with high recycled content and actually pulled together local and state government procurement bodies to try and think through how they're purchasing materials with high recycled content to try and reduce their stockpiles of recycled materials. And there's a lot of media going around about this. So like I said, there's some really, depending on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, there's a crisis happening at the moment, and there are massive stockpiles and contamination, and shipments are being sent back to Australia because they no longer meet stringent contamination rate requirements. But there's also really positive stuff coming out. So, government recycle targets could turbocharge the circular economy. So there is a real split, even in the media, around whether this is a crisis or this is just an opportunity that's been untapped. And certainly I think if you speak to a lot of material suppliers in the industry, a lot of them have offerings with high recycled content or eco offerings that they just can't get a consistent demand for to be able to get the operational efficiency that would then enable them to be competitive against regular mainstream products in that space. And so like I said, I speak to a lot of them and they're all out there. They say, look, we've got an offering that people just don't buy on a consistent basis to be able to specify that and keep that running through the same way we do with other products. And so if I go back to the Australian Waste and Recycling Expo last week, they ran a survey before that event and put out a white paper. And like I said, there's this yin and yang version of this world of, the bad news. The high cost of recycling in Australia has seen many local councils abandoning recycling schemes and sending their waste to landfill. And that is the nature of curbside recycling. Without subsidies, the economic argument in this space, it's really hard to make it stack up as to the cost efficiencies of being able to do that. Now, there are a couple of ideas floating around about there how we get efficiencies with that. One of them is, well, how about every council use the same recycling rules and we have less contamination issues? And then all of the providers would be able to then find efficiencies in all of their services across different council groups, and would that be lovely? And so there's a few things like that we can all work to try and make those curbside recycling programs more cost effective than what they are, although there is no silver bullet coming through about how that can then all of a sudden become economically viable and it's long term. But on the positive side, that survey also revealed that 85% of those survey respondents were planning investments of up to $500,000, and 12% had planned to invest more than $1 million in recycling over the next number of years. So that's a massive injection of money into an industry, and I don't think that everyone will be injecting that sort of money into an industry unless they're optimistic that they can deliver the outcomes and get the solutions that they're after. And so 54% of survey respondents were confident that new recycling technology would transform the sector in the next 1 to 3 years. Now, I don't think there's many other industries out there that are sort of pushing for a complete transformation transformation in the next few years where a lot of people are confident that that's going to transform and have effect in that sector. And I think that on balance then for me, if I had to sit back and decide, well, that's the issue, is this a crisis or an opportunity? It would definitely be an opportunity to develop those solutions for a growing community that throws away a lot more. And so with that, talking about communities, we are going to switch to Rob Ball. So Rob Ball is a civil engineer with over 30 years experience in the development industry. And prior to joining Lendlease in 1999, he worked in a variety of major residential, commercial and infrastructure projects in Australia, UK, Middle East and Southeast Asia. So Rob currently holds the position of Senior Development Manager within the communities business at Lendlease and works primarily on the Yarrabilba project team, where his role involves the administration of infrastructure planning, sustainability and innovation initiatives and supports the production team for current precinct design and construction processes for Yarrabilba. So with that amazing introduction, I now invite Rob to come up and talk to you. You don't have to listen to me.
Thanks, Alan, and good evening, everyone. Just stand up the way somewhere. Okay. Whoops, now I've probably done that. Go back. No. Put your glasses on, see what you're doing, please. Bingo. Okay. We're in business. Alright, so what I'm going to talk about today feeds in a little bit to what Hayley's just been talking about there, but starts to relate it back to the household level. So we're talking about the Yarrabilba community that we're developing just south of Brisbane here, just down past Beenleigh. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the moment, and what we've done in developing a circular economy strategy for Yarrabilba, realising this has got a long way to go, and if we want to make this work, we need this as a platform. So where is Yarrabilba? Tells you a little bit about there. We're about halfway between Brisbane and the Gold Coast, just south of Beenleigh. We sit under Logan City Council, but we are actually a PDA under control of Economic Development Queensland, which is part of state development. Through that PDA, we have a number of mechanisms that we don't have through normal planning processes, and this has helped us to a certain degree in being able to bring some of these initiatives forward. A little bit about the project site itself. So it's 2029 hectares there. It's actually about 2060 hectares now, and that's through some old historical road closures. Approximately 6 kilometres north, south, east to west. Historically, it's been an old pine plantation. Second World War, it was Camp Cable, which is a lot of a US Army base. There's a lot of history associated with it. Our traditional landowners are the Yarrabilba people. We have a very good working relationship and a cultural heritage management plan with them. And I also pay my respects to both the traditional landowners here and to the Yarrabilba people in the Yarrabilba area. Yarrabilba in its own right is a Yarrabilba word, which is a historical name associated with this area. It means place of song. And that's for a particular reason. This is the northern part of their area, and this was a location we've identified where they traditionally met over thousands of years with all the adjoining mobs over the southeast Queensland area. So it has special significance about being a meeting place and a place to celebrate. A few other details there, great topography. It's actually, even though from a Brisbane-centric perspective, it's kind of way out there, to the residents at Yarrabilba and the local community, it's actually in the middle of everything. Think about it, we're like 15-20 minutes away from the Hyperdome, we're about half an hour away from the theme parks. Where else would you want to be? Okay, so that's a little bit about just regionally where we are. The actual proposed community that we've master planned, as you can see, it's a 30-year development cycle going out to 2042, so we're only about 7 years into that now. Ultimate approximately, we're looking at around about 45,000 people, about 17,000 homes, and about 13,000 jobs. So it's a big community by anybody's any description. And to put it into context, that's about the size of Bunbury by the time we're finished. So this is really a regional town within a city council area. And it really has to have all of the amenity and all of the background and the structure to it to work on that basis. So we've got a lot of other things here, some of the other interesting stats: 100 hectares of business park, 11 schools, and we've got about 400 hectares of open space in that area. So about 25% of our total development area is dedicated to open space, be it environmental or public amenity, sports fields, etc. You'll see on the next slide, that's about where we've got to now. So this is only the northern sector. So in the 7 years we've been operating, we have produced around about 3,500 lots. We currently have about 3,000 occupied and a population of about 8,000 people there. So we're about 20% of the way through, but still a substantial population in its own right. Very engaged community, really interested in the types of things that we're looking to do. Okay, so what does this tell us all? So, a long-term development. We're there for a very long time. As I said, we're only 7 years into a 30-year journey. When we started out, we were very conscious of the fact that we have these types of timeframes to deal with, and really, we don't know what's going to be the current technologies or societal issues in 10 years' time, let alone 20 years' time or 30 years' time. So from day one, we had to create a platform where we could grow and evolve over time. So we've done that through a few things. We have, from the very beginning, we have a full fibre to the home comms network. So it's all fibre optic through the entire development. NBN is not in there, thankfully. It's all being done through Opticom. And we also, as part of that process, put in a 12-kilometre fibre optic feed to service the development. We also brought in a we have reticulated natural gas through the area, again brought in a 10-kilometre trunk feed for that. We've taken a few other steps that we could at the time when we started back in 2012. One of the examples of that is from the very beginning, all of our public lighting, street lighting, park lighting, etc. is all LED. Don't know if many people know, but it's only in the last 12 months that Energex has actually accepted LED as a standard fitting, bizarrely enough. We faced that barrier at the very beginning, so to overcome that, we entered into a 5-year management and maintenance agreement with Logan City Council to run and operate those lights for that period of time. We did a monitoring process as part of that, and we were able to prove quite successfully that these are very highly efficient. They had a failure rate of less than 0.2%, which is better than the actual manufacturer's recommendation. We save council in the vicinity of $250,000 to $300,000 a year in power costs. So we've proven that point, and we'd like to think out of some of that work that these are now being accepted as standard fittings by Energex. So where does this lead us to? Okay, we've done that, plus a few other things as well. So about 2 years ago we thought, well, we're doing all these great things here and there. How do we link them all together? What's the platform that's really going to drive this thing forward? Circular economy was being bandied around and was being talked about. As Haley alluded to before, a lot of people knew what it was all about. We have heard about it. Well, this might be our answer. So around about 2 years ago, we started talking to people in the know, and we were introduced to Corio, which many of you may know, Ashley and Danny Morris, who are local experts in this field. And through them, we also got introduced to Ricardo. Ricardo are a UK-based company who, quite a wide-reaching company, but they do have very definite specialties in that whole waste area. They've actually written the waste policies for the UK and were instrumental in the curbside separation and recycling systems that are currently being used in Wales and Scotland, which rank up there with world's best practice. So in conjunction with Ricardo and Corio, we entered into a bit of a journey, to understand what we need to do, what's of the most relevance to us, and how do we go about doing it. You may recall that first graphic I had up there. That was part of the storyboard that came out of our very first workshop to try and understand what are we trying to do here and what does it mean to us. So we've been through that journey over a period of about a year and a half. We then did all the technical assessments and eventually came up with our circular economy strategy. That was published in April this year. And a bit along the theme of what we've been talking about, we quite deliberately call this more than waste, because it is more than waste. It's not just about what do you do with your rubbish, this is about the whole lifestyle change. Circular economy is all invasive and really needs to be the basis of how we do everything, not just various things. So we've developed that strategy. We have published that strategy. If anybody's interested, I can give you a copy of our overview document. The one you'll see the cover of there is our actual full strategy document. It runs to about 140 pages if you're really interested. But we have produced an executive version of about 20 pages, which really gives you the highlights. The other thing I'd like to point out too is this strategy was quite deliberately written in a way that people can use this. We're, as far as we can tell, we're the only master plan community in Australia that actually has a documented circular economy strategy, and one of the few in the world that actually have one. Through the work we've done here and our engagement with the state government, they've become very interested in this sort of thing, so we've been now becoming more involved with the work that through DES, QTC, state development, etc., and getting involved with a few of the other initiatives that they're doing. Darren Perrin from Ricardo and myself have presented at probably, I'd say about 6 to 8 conferences over the last 12 months, and the interest in this is just astounding. I mean, the way it's just really taking off, particularly over the last probably 6 to 12 months. So, the strategy for us, is largely sort of encapsulated in that vision statement. I won't read it out, it's fairly long-winded, but kind of captured what we wanted to say when this is all about. This is all about empowering the community. That was really the nub of it for us. A circular economy is great, having a strategy is great, but if you don't engage the community, it just won't happen. They've got to understand what it means to them and how they can benefit out of it. And this has become part of the mantra as we're moving forward now. So, as I said before, we tried to keep this as simple as possible, using lots of pictures and diagrams and simple dot point statements. So this is one that we produced really just to sort of encapsulate what it all means. There is a wider slide deck that goes with this, which shows you arrows going in all directions, showing how this links to this, links to this, links to this. So that's a wider one, but this really just sort of encapsulates what it means for a community in a pictorial sense. And just to prove the point, it is actually circular. So I won't go, I did have another slide here just talking about what a circular economy is, but I think I'm preaching inverted here, so I won't go into any definitions of linear versus circular economies. What I will talk about is what are the enablers, how is this going to happen? So what we're saying here is these are all of the different touch points that we need to deal with to be able to really make it meaningful for a community. So we need to change the way we do business, we need to use technology and innovation. People will respond to that. Getting the data and sharing that information is also important, so it has a relevance to the people that it's actually affecting. Designing, procurement, end markets, etc., collaboration, partnerships, extremely important, and that information, knowledge and education, as Andy touched on earlier on. So out of that process, we then came up with 4 major touch points for us which are relevant to what we're doing. As you can see there, materials, energy, transport and water. So materials is talking about that whole waste process, but then it's all the others as well. So our energy processes, how do we make our energy use circular? Our transport systems, how are they going to form part of that whole circular discussion? And in particular water. That's another big one for us, and it's becoming another big one for us, again, as we head into another drought period. I won't go into these in too much detail in terms of time, but for each of these objectives, we had to set ourselves targets. And that's what we've done in here. We're not saying that we will necessarily achieve all these, and some of these we may not. But we've got a starting point and we know where we want to try and get to with some of these aspirations. So it gives us the relevance, and not only that, it gives our community an understanding of where we're trying to go with some of these things. So same again for water in our objectives. Again, trying to make it not too far out. Again, very conscious of the fact if you try and get too technical or too blue sky with some of these things, people just think, wow, this is all too hard, the shutters go down and you just lose them. You've got to keep it relevant and keep it stepping along with them. Energy was another one, looking at how we can reduce, what can we do, and transport. So looking at things like mobility as a service, for instance. So the opportunity for us was to link those four together and to throw in another one because of our particular circumstance, and that's agriculture. As I mentioned before, we're about 2,000 odd hectares. We've only dealt with about the first 800, so we've still got 1,200 hectares out there. Some of that we won't be getting at for another 20 years. When I say getting at, I mean in a developer's terms. But certainly it's land that's under our control, and it's land we have a responsibility for. As I mentioned earlier on, this is an old pine plantation. It had been operating as a pine plantation for about 40 years. Pretty heavily denuded, a lot of regrowth on the area. Soils were well denuded as well. So it needed a lot of work. To do something with that, all of our balanced land, which is about 1,200 hectares, is under control of the land manager. So we have an adjustment just to explain, Lendlease owns some of the land, which we progressively buy, but we have a land management agreement with our landowner. So we have one person who owns all that land, we have an agreement with them, we progressively buy the land off them, although we have responsibility for managing all of it. So to look at our balanced land, we have a land management adjustment agreement. So David, Sharon, Bruce, who are our land managers, SDA Land Care, they have an adjustment agreement with the landowner, and we have a management agreement with them. They look after all of that balanced land for us. So basically what we've done, all of the future green spaces were identified early on, were all surveyed and basically set aside. And really all we've done in those spaces is gone in and cleaned them up. So taken out pine trees, taken out lantana, cleaned it up and let it do its own thing. Again, as I said before, we aren't getting to some of these areas of an urban front or development for another 20 years. So we've got a lot of time to let those areas regenerate of their own accord, and we already know that this is going to happen very successfully just because of the land we've already dealt with. So some of those corridors up there, basically all we've done is just clean the weeds out, let the sun get back into it, there's enough seed stock in the ground, it just goes nuts. And that's the principles we're using. Kieran's in the audience tonight, he's intimately involved with this process, yeah, I mean, that's proven to be the most successful thing for us. It's really let nature do its own thing. Give it all the helping hand it needs, but try not to get too carried away and trying to do too much. That's the important thing. Obviously, there are areas that are pretty heavily denuded that do need some assistance, but some of the other areas are really regenerated beautifully of their own accord. All of the future development areas, on the other hand, which is primarily all pine regrowth, gone in, taken it all out. Dave's gone to rework all that soil using growing fodder crops, bringing the livestock in across it, ploughing it back in, repeat process. And he's been doing that for about 4 years now. And the amount of fertility he's got back in the soil just by those simple processes is astounding. When he first started out there, he didn't think he could put any livestock on there whatsoever. He now runs 400 cattle, 800 goats, a few pigs, a bunch of sheep. It's a real working farm. And not only is it a real working farm, but the biodiversity we have on site now is astounding. Again, we've created a beautiful area for the kangaroos and wallabies and the magpies. All of a sudden they've got this great pasture they never had before, when all they had was lousy old pine forest. So they're booming, part of the fun. And also, I mean, all the other ancillaries that come back with it, bird life, etc., is just really coming along really nicely. So all of those things are working into it. Now coming back to the agricultural, sort of sidetracked a little bit there, but we are looking at that balanced land and saying, well, what else can we do down there? And one of our examples is at the moment we've set aside 34 hectares of land that we know we won't be getting at for at least 15 to 20 years. we're growing Pongaña piñata on there, so I don't know if people are familiar with that. It's a legume, grows to about 3 or 4 metres high, and the seeds that's produced off those plants are a biofuel. Can be directly processed the same way as they process olives, put it through a crushing process, and that oil is a direct biofuel replacement. So we've planted that. That's been growing now for about 12 to 18 months. We will harvest our first seeds in about 3 years' time. Then over the subsequent 15 years, we've done the calculations. We estimate we'll be able to produce enough biofuel out of that 34 hectares to basically offset the entire diesel use across the life of this community development by about 2.5 times. So it's those simple steps that are really sort of adding to the whole mix that comes into what we're producing around the circular economy. And it's creating all of these sort of demonstrations that you can really do things. As I mentioned earlier, the relevance around some of this is really looking at opportunities and bringing it back to a household level. So waste opportunities, which is obviously a big focus of what we've got here, we're looking at what is that in a total circular, with some circular logic going on to it. So we've really started to look at how this community could bring in something new in terms of waste. So as I mentioned before, Ricardo, we're really involved with what they've done in Wales and Scotland, which is all about curbside separation. We are now looking at introducing some trials of those types of processes here in Australia. Hasn't been done here before. None of the equipment to do this exists in Australia at the moment. We're in the process of bringing some of that in to run a trial at Yarrabilba within the next 12 to 18 months. Again, through the number of conferences we've been attending and talking about this sort of thing, we know that Sustainability Victoria is very much onto this. There are a number of councils now in and around Queensland who are starting to take an interest in it. So it is certainly something that's picking up, and we want to be at the forefront of getting this happening. We may not be the first at the end of the day, but we're certainly going to do it the best. So this is a watch this space one. So we think this is a really exciting opportunity to really develop some excellent waste streams, which is really the nub of the problem that we face at the moment. But again, this is all around education. I'll talk about that a little bit further on. So transport opportunities, again, some of the things we've been talking about are out there in the ether. It's looking about how people are using their workspaces, where their workspaces are, how they're using mobility, what are the options around alternative forms of transport. Mobility as a service, of course, biofuels, which I've spoken about, electric vehicles we know are coming. We have a fast EV charger at Yarrabilba. We have for about 3 years now, and that's getting usage as well. Again, put it in there, put it in front of people so they can actually look at one and see what it does, and people can actually come in and use it. It's there free of charge, and we have probably half a dozen residents that have EVs in Yarrabilba. They use it regularly. We've got a number of businesses around the local area that are running EVs. They use it regularly as well. But that's been a boon for them. Classic example is we've got a fellow who runs 2 electric vans. He does like security screens. He operates out of Mount Tamborine, and we're perfectly located for him, so he can go from there out to Jimboomba or out to Bow Desert, do a job, come back to us, recharge, go off to another project at Beenleigh or out of Cleveland, come back, recharge, and we're a perfect pivot point for him. So he's getting so much more use out of the vans, plus it's helping his business. So it's those type of demonstrations, small as they may be, which is showing that these things can actually happen. Energy opportunities, again, we've been talking a lot about in the space about what's happening with renewables, etc. We're looking at microgrid systems, etc., bringing it back to a local focus, a very important aspect of it. Water opportunities, again, looking at the whole water cycle management, getting councils to understand that proper total water cycle management is important, is beneficial, and does have cost benefits to them. Some of them don't quite get that yet. And looking at the overall utilities opportunities. As I mentioned before, it's all about the household. This is where it's got to start. We can put as many policies in place as we want to. We can have as many businesses waving their arms around as we want. but if you don't get the households really on board with this, it won't go anywhere. So our total focus is really about the household, getting them to understand how that all works for them. That's what this diagram really tries to demonstrate, and working on it on a progressive basis. Okay, taking all that on board, how are we going to do it? So as part of the plan, we have a series of actions and implementations, which looks at all the different components that I spoke about earlier. How are they going to occur? And then where are we going from next? So we've set out a bit of a roadmap to say, well, what are we going to do over the next 5 years? This is a long-term project. So we produced a roadmap. So we've got a roadmap. And that really sets up some of the steps of what we need to do in the early days. And this is all about getting that information, getting that engagement, getting some early quick wins, in other words, demonstrating that things can occur and how they can start to link into people's everyday lives. So it's education and enlightenment. That's really what it's all about. And then as we sort of move our way through it, and all the other technologies around us start to evolve as well, we're in a position there where Yarrabilba can be its own circular economy. So this is all about laying that platform. We've got a long way to go. We've really did that, and we're doing some of those early steps right now. But really, this is a long journey, and we believe that we've at least got the basis to get that started. Hopefully, by what we've produced here, we can provide some ideas to others. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we produced this as a document people can use as a reference. It's not just for our own purposes, it's really to put out to a template to all of our other projects, that they can actually get some ideas or inspiration out of that to be able to move this forward as a wider society platform, if you like. I think I've rambled on long enough, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. Any other questions or any other things you'd like to ask about, please feel free at the appropriate time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Hydrate.
You bet.
Remember to hydrate. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. That was an amazing case study to get in there. So next, I won't linger on, but we do have Nana Borsi. I got it right before. Nana Borsi.
Yeah.
To speak to us next. So he's a senior life cycle assessment specialist with advanced certification with the company Global Green Tag International. He's currently serving as a scientist on their team. Very long bio, I'll try and summarize it for you. But a lot of processes of environmental perspectives, and it's critical for improving transparency. Nana worked extensively in sustainability and environmental management on the global stage in both developed and developing countries, and has applied his skills of LCA, industrial ecology research, and solutions provider in projects from Africa, the United States to Germany, Eastern Europe, Asia, also in New Zealand, where he's finalising works on his doctorate degree from the University of Otago. Lots and lots and lots in there. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Nana. Thank you.
I guess I have to hold it. Hi there. You all awake? Sweet. As Haley introduced, I'm a senior assessment specialist in Global Green Tag. What we basically do is we are a third-party certifying body focusing on improving transparency in materials used in the built environment, basically. We focus on product health, so our assessment usually covers two major aspects. There's the health and ecotoxicity aspect, which focuses on the healthiness of products being used, and there's also the aspect that focuses on the global supply chain. So we focus on aspects such on social responsibility, ILO conventions, and we rate products based on how well they're doing on those indicators. So we currently ACC, ACCC certified. We also an ISO 9000 DMV certified organization, ISO 14024 certified organization. So we very much focus, make sure that companies or manufacturers are not basically saying that they're just sustainable, and they actually have to prove that they are sustainable, they're doing the right thing. They actually have to have evidence to show that they are sustainable. We work with, we currently working with over 130 manufacturers in built environment. Currently have over 1,000 certified products. So, and these are different product ranges. So what we do is we get their product formulations, we go through their product formulation, we assess them on the healthiness of the ingredients going into the products, whether they are really meeting the limits that are required by the government regulations and everything, by the industry and all that. So these are some of our clients. So we're compliant with LEED and BREEAM. Country specific, we're compliant with BEAM Hong Kong, Asidama, which is the UAE one. We currently also very compliant with Green Star Africa. And in total, we actually we're compliant in 158 countries at the moment. So when products get certified, they can be used in those 158 countries because they will meet those standards required there. This is our homepage. This is Global Green Tax homepage. What are we doing in terms of improving improving on recycling abilities in Australia, in terms of encouraging manufacturers to use recycled content in their products? Our standards are designed in such a way that we have services that we offer which are compliant with GBCA. So, and with those services, there are services like green rates, where you have to have a level A, a level B, level C, depending on how well you meet those indicators. And to be able to get to level A, you'd have to meet certain requirements. And our standard, we've put in place procedures in such a way that if you have recycled content in your product, it's easier to be able to get to certain levels. It's easier to get to level A. So there is a harder path, there is a difficult path to get to level A, but with recycled content, we make it a bit easier to get there. Just because we look at recycled content as not going back to the virgin materials and going to dig up those resources to produce again, but you're reusing what is already in the cycle, in the system. So these are just excerpts of what our standards say. So products for certification will focus on reducing the life cycle impacts via progressive improvement of waste minimization, increasing recycled content, creating or maintaining recyclability, including rapidly renewable resource content where possible. And we certify different types of products. So for example, if you're looking at plastic composite decking, it must contain recycled content. If we're looking at packaging must have the plastic resin identification code clearly imprinted on each container, comprised entirely of materials able to be recycled. So these are some of the things that we actually look at. Similarly, if you're looking at fiber, polyester, things coming from PVC, and An example will be where we usually require polyester fibers to contain at least 75% recycled content here. So these are some of the things that we actually do. We do when we're looking at materials that are being certified by us. So one of the things that actually moves materials from level A to level B is in terms of one of the indicators in terms of material optimization. So if a material has more than 50% recycled content, it definitely can get level A. It definitely can get level A if it has all the other indicators. Anything level B, it will have to at least have about 20% of recycled material contents in there. Currently, just before I came here, I looked in our system and then I realized that so over about 1/4 of the materials that we currently certify actually have recycled content in them, which I think is pretty good considering if you're looking at the built environment, if you have over 1,000 products that have come for certification, you have about 1/4. That is actually a good thing. In terms of materials that we actually certify, we currently have certified. We have insulation products, we have flooring products, we have decking and cladding products, furniture, bricks, paving, engineered wood, ceiling products, blinds, textiles, so things that actually go into buildings, built environment, basically. From just digging through work that we've done, if you look at, for example, insulation, what we're seeing is the products that we've certified, the recycled content in insulation products are between 25% to 90%. And this could be post-consumer, post-industrial. And in insulation, most of the recycled content are coming from recycled PET bottles and then recycled glass. So there is value in those waste materials. I don't like to call them waste because there's the resources that will go back into the system. So that is one example. If you look at flooring in our system, the recycled content between the flooring products are between 9 to about 90%, depending on the type of flooring, depending on where it is being used. And those kinds of resources that recycled content going in there include glass, you have car and tire trucks going into some of them, especially I think mostly in the external flooring products. Recycled carpet scraps, so you have companies with product stewardship in place, especially in the flooring industry. So you have Target have their reuse product stewardship program going on. Then there's the PVC scraps that also go into the flooring materials. I'm looking at more stats for you so that you can understand what we're dealing with here. Decking, we currently, with the products with recycled content in our system, that's about between 30%, they contain between 30% to 70% recycled content. So once again, showing that, all right, manufacturers are actually listening and actually doing what is required of them. Particularly in decking, the recycled content come from recycled plastics, HDP particularly, and then wood fiber basically. Bricks and paving, you have between 45% to 100%. And 100% last couple of years ago, I worked with Downer on the asphalt roadway, which was full of aggregates and car truck tires and all that. So recycled oil and all that. That went into it. Sealing, mostly, that's about 20 to 35% in most cases in terms of the recycled content. And we're getting this from, they're using materials such as fiberglass and scraps, PVC scraps, for those things. Blinds, one example also, we're looking between 65 to 80% recycled content in the blinds that we've certified. And that is just a little bit of detail for you. In terms of where our certificates are used, our certificates are compliant. They can be used in over nearly 100,000 LEED projects. We recently got LEED certification. So with manufacturers coming to us, they get certificates from us. Those certificates comply with LEED, they comply with BREEAM, they comply with WELL. And I don't know how much you guys know about what is going on with WELL. It's more about the healthiness of products in use. So a lot in terms of interior, indoor air, indoor quality, the indoor environment. Green Star Africa, Green Star, GBCA, Green Star in Australia and New Zealand also. And I think that's about it for me.
Excellent, thank you, Nana.